Hi, I'm John Knowles, software trainer for Adobe. In this video, we'll be talking about exporting in Premiere Pro. You finished your edit, you're ready to output, but now what? How do you get your work out of the program? What are the best settings? And what are the most efficient ways to speed up the process? Well, not to worry, let me show you all the different options available to you. Okay, I've got my project open here. There is an ad that I want to export. It's game time, drip. Okay. Now, this is part of a production, which is why you don't see the media in the project. Hopefully, you've watched the tutorial about production, so you understand how all that works. It's just pulling the media from another project in the production here. And this is kind of nice. You just have a one clean project here for exporting, no other stuff involved. Here on the timeline, I have some extra tracks and some markers and things like that, and I want to get rid of those before I export. Now, this is an optional step. You don't have to do this. These empty tracks and markers will not affect your output, but I like to keep things nice and tidy. So I want to make a copy of this sequence with the things that I don't need kind of stripped away here. So I'm going to go up under Sequence, and I'm going to choose Simplify Sequence. And this gives me some options here. It's going to automatically duplicate this sequence, which is nice. And I'm going to rename this and add Final Cut. And I'm just going to give it a date. In this case, this is April of 2024. And we have options here to close vertical gaps on video tracks if we want to. That's going to change the separation between video tracks if there doesn't need to be a space there. It's going to move things around for you. If there are any multicam clips in the sequence, you're going to want to do this step anyway. You're going to want to flatten those. Once you're ready to export a final, you want to commit to those multicam edits. You don't need all 4 or 5 tracks of multicam or more in those multicam clips. You've settled on your single video clip, hopefully, for those edits that you need. You don't need the rest. So go ahead and flatten those out. And you can remove from video, audio, or both. I'm going to keep both checked here, and I want to get rid of those empty tracks. There's options here for removing things like graphics and transitions and disabled or muted tracks, disabled clips, things like that. These are really good for turnovers. If you are an assistant editor or an editor who is preparing for a turnover for sound, for color, things like that, these options would be useful. You want to strip out anything that other finishing person does not need. And we have options to remove sequence markers, which I'm going to select all just to be safe. Make sure I've got them all in there, and I'm going to hit Simplify. And that has automatically duplicated my sequence, and now I have this Add Final Cut with the date ready to go. I'm going to close out the other one and see how it got rid of all the empty tracks I didn't need, the audio and the video, and stripped out all of those markers. So again, that was Simplify Sequence. So in Premiere Pro, you have essentially 3 ways to export. You have the quick export option, you have the regular export option, and you can choose to export through Media Encoder, which is a sidecar application that comes with Premiere Pro. Let me start by showing you the quick export option. It's up here in the upper right-hand corner. It's this box here with an up arrow. If you click on that, you get a very simple interface up here. You're going to choose a preset and a location, and that's it. If you have a preset in there already loaded that you know you want, just click on it and tell it where to go. So I'm going to go down here to this browser. I'm going to choose Match Source Adaptive High Bitrate, and there we go. And it's telling me right here, I have a little pop-up below that shows me that will be an H.264 file. Here's the size, the frame rate, and the rough megabits per second that it's going to give me, and the running time of this spot, which is 34 seconds. And it's going to be stereo, and the estimated file size, which is 66 megabytes. So I just hit export. There we go. Now, if you want to add to those presets, you see there were several listed here, some ProRes options, and there's some custom presets that I have made in here for myself as well. There's a preset for YouTube. Those are not all of the presets that are in the program. There's actually many, many more, and you can choose to populate this list with as many or as few as you want. So down here, you can click on More Presets, and it's going to bring up this preset manager. Now, the reason Adobe did this is because there couldn't possibly be a menu large enough to handle all the presets that the program ships with. You can see there's a lot of options in here. There's different professional output codecs like ProRes, as well as MXF and you've got some AVC Intra, DNX HQ, there's Avid codecs in here, and so on and so forth. Lots of different options in here. If you know what you're looking for, you can just type it up here in the search bar. So those are all the DNX right there. And you can see that there's a frame size with that preset and a frame rate. And we have categories over here on the right as well. Let me take that out. So you can see that there are presets for broadcast, for camera, for DVD and Blu-ray, as well as web video down here at the bottom. And you've got options for viewing presets up at the top here as well. We've got system presets, which are going to be, for the most part, identical, but it's not going to show you any custom presets. Custom presets are listed here. These are presets that you made, that you saved as a custom output preset. They will show up here in this menu. You see I have two here with a star that is filled in. Now that solid star means that it's a favorite, and if a preset is favorited, it will show up in those export menus under preset. So we can just show the favorites for here. We can also show all presets, just show the favorites in there, and you'll see that this list matches what was available up in here. All right, so we go back down to more presets and show favorites only. Let's say I want to take something out of the favorites. I'm not going to do any high quality 720p or 480, so I'll just remove those. So you just click on the star, and those presets, they won't be deleted from your system. They'll just disappear from that menu. And if you want to add presets, turn that star off up there. That's just a way to limit the view. I want to add this Adobe stock without audio. I want to upload some really cool clips that I shot, maybe some drone footage, but I don't need the sound from that. I'll turn that one on, and now that one will be in my favorites in the presets menu up here. And there it is, Adobe stock without audio. So that's how you can mix and match different presets you want to appear in this menu. So the quick export option is for that editor who just wants to get this sequence out of the program, onto the desktop, upload it to a cloud service for a review, just get it out. And if you know exactly what preset you need and those settings are exactly what you want, then just choose it and click on it. You can do full broadcast outputs through the quick export menu as well. If you're not going to alter any of the export settings in the main export window, then quick export is obviously the way to go. Now, in addition to the quick export menu, we have the export tab up here on the left. This takes you into the main export window right here. And just to be clear, these are two different ways of getting to the same result, which is outputting your sequence from Premiere Pro. The quick export menu is simply giving you a stripped down interface, choose your option where it goes, and that's it. If you want to refine your export and give it some additional criteria, additional options, additional output options here, or use this interface to create a preset, this is the tab that you want. So let me explain what's going on here in the export window. We've got three main sections. Over here on the left, we have destinations, and over here we have settings. This is where you actually set up the individual settings for the parts of your export. And then you have a big preview window over here that shows your entire source timeline here. There we are. That's the full ad. You can see again that's at 34 seconds. And you see the range is the entire source down here on the left. So that is what will get output. And you've got some basic transport controls down here. You see information about the source, and you see information about the output. As you change things in the settings panel, you'll see the output criteria will change down here. Now, up here on the left, destinations, where is it going? By default, media file is going to be on. You are exporting a file to your computer. What happens after that can be determined with these switches down here. You can export the file and have it upload directly to one of these services: Adobe Behance, Facebook, TikTok, Vimeo, X, YouTube, or you could set up your own cloud storage with an FTP login. You can choose to publish to Facebook, for example, and you'll be prompted to log into your account and tell it which page to go on, give the video a title, and you can even type in a description here and add hashtags if you want. There's options there as well to delete the local file. So if you don't want to keep it after it's been exported to your computer, you can click this box here, and you can do multiple. So I could publish to Facebook, TikTok, and let's say Vimeo simultaneously. I just need to log into all three services and tell it where to go. All right, let's go back here to the media file option. And you see here at the top on settings, you can choose to change the name right there. It's already been exported once, which is why it's been appended with this one here at the end. I'm going to change that. I'm going to actually put the codec that I'm about to use in the title here, so I can tell that that is a ProRes output. And here under preset, again, this menu matches the quick export preset, and you can always choose more at the bottom there with more presets and add some stars. I'm actually going to make sure the ProRes setting I want is in there. So I'm going to type in ProRes, and I can see there I want just straight Apple ProRes 422 in a QuickTime MOV wrapper, not an MXF. We have both options here. I'll choose that one and hit OK. And it automatically selected the one that I just favorited because that's now in the list. There we go. And format is, basically when you set the preset, whatever format that preset is, it will automatically select that. If you don't want to use the preset there, you can go to format and change that separately. Now you don't need to choose a preset. You could set up this output the way you want manually by first starting with the format. Right now it's set on QuickTime, which will allow me to use any of the codecs that the QuickTime wrapper can hold, or I could do things like a PNG sequence, MXF, MPEG-4, MPEG-2. There's options in there for, again, Blu-ray or DVD still. And we have some audio-only options as well. So if I just wanted to export just the audio from this sequence, for example, I would change the format here at the bottom to waveform audio. There will be no video, and the preview is blanked. And I can just set up the audio the way I want with the sample size and the channels and the sample rate and export that. That would be an audio-only output. Otherwise, I'll just go back to that ProRes 422 preset, which sets everything up the way I like it. And I'm going to twirl down this video panel here. We've got video, audio, captions, effects, metadata, and general. So we are exporting video, so that switch is blue. That's correct. That's on. Video codec is Apple ProRes 422. That was part of the preset. Again, if you want to change that codec now, you still can. And these are all the codecs available to me in that QuickTime wrapper. We have all of the Apple ProRes options. We have animation. We have Apple ProRes up to 4444XQ. We have the DNHR, DV25, DV50, DVC Pro, H.264. You can do H.264 inside a QuickTime wrapper if you want. And we have uncompressed options here below. I'm going to keep that at Apple ProRes 422. Now, with all of these buttons checked, it's going to match the original source here. And if at any time I decide to change that, I can just uncheck the box and say, oh, I'll set the frame size to 4K. I'll do a blow up. For example, it was a 1080 sequence. I'm going to blow it up to 4K on output. If I change my mind, I can always go back and click Match Source. That will reset that to the actual frame size of the sequence, and that box will be checked again. Once the box is checked, you can't change those options. You could change the frame rate on output, the field order to progressive to upper or lower if you're outputting interlaced, for example, and you could also change the aspect ratio. Now, one word of caution here, you really don't want to change the frame rate on export, at least not in this window. You want to export with the same frame rate that you were cutting in. So my sequence here was 23976. I'm going to export the exact same frame rate. Even though I have a broadcast spec that tells me I have to say output at 2997, I'm going to export this 23976. I'm going to take that file and either bring it back into Premiere Pro or put it in Media Encoder and then transcode it to 2997. Or from the beginning, I would have set up my project so that I was cutting my original 24 frame source material in a 2997 sequence. The reason being has to do with cadence. How many frames are duplicated based on the pull up or pull down that has to happen when you edit footage that's one frame rate into a sequence that's a different frame rate. So Premiere Pro will do the math. It has to do the math there, but it's either best done at the editing stage. In other words, again, you take that source footage and you put it into a different timeline, a timeline with a different frame rate, or you output the same frame rate and then transcode that file into the different frame rate. If you do it here in the output window and you try to send that to QC, quality control, they will tend to reject that file. It won't have the proper cadence for the pull up or the pull down. So again, Don't change the frame rate here. Leave it at whatever you cut your sequence in. And if you need to change it, change the resulting file by transcoding it one more time. Okay, so we're going to leave that frame rate alone and just leave it at the sequence frame rate. So down here, there's other options for the video. You can render at maximum depth. I'll explain that in a moment. We have depth options there, 8-bit, 16-bit, maximum render quality. If you have any alpha channels, in other words, there's transparency in the image and you only want to output those transparent areas, you can do a straight alpha channel output. That's more for a VFX thing there. And things like bit rate, that doesn't come into play with the ProRes codecs, by the way. They have a set bit rate that's part of that codec. It's not something that's really adjustable. And if you are working in VR, you want to make sure to check this box here so that you get the proper stereo or monoscopic VR output from your video. That's the video tab here. I'm going to close that just to save some video real estate here. There we go. And open up the audio. A lot less options in here. The audio codec is going to be uncompressed. That's part of the ProRes 422 QuickTime option. You can change the sample rate, though, to something else if you want, and the sample size from 16 all the way up to 32-bit float. And you can hide this channel section here if you want with this more or less button. What that shows you is you will get 2 channels of stereo output, or you could choose to do 2 channels of mono output on channel 1 and channel 2. That's all that's available because this sequence was originally a stereo sequence. There aren't multiple channels in here. And here for captions, we have no captions on this track right now. I'll turn those on in a second for the next output. And then we see here with effects, you can add basic video effects here, kind of at the last stage here. You can put them on in the export stage if you didn't already add them at the sequence stage. So here are things like tone mapping. You can add a lumetri look or a LUT right here. You can do a conform, an image overlay, a text overlay. If you turn these on, by the way, you will get a preview of what's happening over here in the panel. If I turn on text overlay, there are the options there for that text. There's the source file name. I can do an output file name, which will burn in the name of this file, for example. Don't really want that right now. You could do timecode. That'll come in handy if you need to output something with the timecode burned into it for review. You can just do it right here. You can also throw on a quick video limiter here. That's for, again, for broadcast. You just want to make sure that all your levels are clipped appropriately there. And even a loudness normalization. If you don't need those options, you can keep those off. You can just turn off the overall effects button if you don't need any of those at all. Same thing with metadata there. You can embed some metadata in the file. You can also create a sidecar file next to it, or you can do both. And that would be a case where if you did want to include markers, you could do so. Again, we'll turn that off. And here in our general, there's just 3 options there. You could choose to immediately re-import this back into the project. You wouldn't have to go to the import window and bring it in and put in your bins. It'll just do it automatically. If you want to use previews, I'll explain why that might be handy here in a moment. And if you're cutting with proxies and you actually want to see the effect of the proxies, maybe your proxies have a LUT in them or they are colored a certain way, and you want to use those proxies in the export, you can click that button to use the proxies. Again, if you don't need any of these options below, really you just need, if you're exporting a standard video file, you just need the video and the audio check boxes to be on or blue and ready to go. Now over here in the preview window, we have some options here as well. Now the range should default back to the last thing you chose the last time you exported. So this may be different each time. You're always going to want to double check the range. Sometimes people set this up a certain way and they forget, and the next time they go to export, this setting sticks, or it doesn't stick and they don't get the setting that they expected. So the options there are entire source, the source in and out, the work area, or a custom. You can set an in and out in the edit process here. So I'll just set a quick in and out point like so. And if I go back to the export tab, I can do source in and out. There we go. And now I can see that in and out that I just set in the timeline. It will only export this range right here. Otherwise, I can flip it back to entire source and it will export everything. You can set those in and out points right here in the output window. You don't have to flip back to the edit tab. Over here in the preview, we have shortcuts here for in point and out point like so. And you can adjust those up here as well if you just want to export that range. Doing it in the output window flips the range to custom, because this is a custom in and out that's only in this window. If I flip back to the edit panel here, it's still that original in and out point that I said, not the one in the export window. So that is custom right there. I'm just going to change that back to entire source. Let me remove this in and out point real quick. The work area bar is this right here. You turn it on from this little hamburger menu next to the name of your sequence. The work area bar is this gray bar here with little blue tabs at either end. You can slide those in or out if you want. And the work area bar is a handy way to see the overall length of your program. As you cut, it will not change. So the work area bar will stay the length that you set it to until you physically change it or move it around. So you can be cutting in the sequence and not have this work area bar affected. And then when you go to output, set the output range to this bar. The work area bar is actually a carryover from After Effects. We use it in that program. You don't need to use it in Premiere Pro. Its main utility is to have a set length on the timeline that is not affected by your editing. It's not like a marker that also will shift as you move things on the timeline. It will stay at a fixed length. So if you're trying to target a specific length, you can see as your edit gets closer and closer to your final runtime there. All right, so we're back here in the export window, and I'll just change that back to entire source. And I'll just eyeball these settings down here one last time. Again, those are my source. That's what the sequence was set up at. And the output is going to be a QuickTime, same size as my sequence. It's 1080 HD, 23976 progressive. There's some color information there. The quality is set to 100. That's automatic with these ProRes codecs. ProRes 422 is the codec. The runtime, 34 seconds, 5 frames, which granted, that is odd, but that's how this commercial came in. So we're going to run with that. Audio is uncompressed, 48 hertz, stereo, 16-bit. Now, with some of these codecs like ProRes, you may not know what the size is going to be until it's done. So this is typical of saying it's unknown. That's totally fine. You'll just see what it is when it outputs. Now, the one main thing we have to select here is where is it going? We've already named it, but we have to tell it where to go. This is the location option here. And actually, we just did that quick export, so it remembers the last location here, which is my exports folder. So that's good. But if I wanted to change the destination, I would set it up here. And if we're ready, we will hit export. And that went pretty quick. All right. Now we've automatically popped back into the edit window. The export is finished. I can actually go out to the Finder here. There's the exports window, and there is the new output. That's the MOV, QuickTime Wrapper, ProRes 422, and it came out at 340 megabytes. All right. Now the third option here is to export to Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder is a sidecar application that comes with Premiere Pro, also comes with After Effects, and it is a standalone batch encoder. You can run it without Premiere Pro running at all if you want. You can just have it open and you can drop files into it from your desktop. You don't need Premiere Pro as part of the process at all. But working with Premiere Pro, you can send things directly to the encoding queue in Media Encoder from Premiere, and you can keep working. You'll notice as I exported from that last timeline, even though it was quick, I couldn't go back to the edit tab and do anything else. I couldn't edit another sequence. I couldn't open another project. I was locked out from doing anything in Premiere Pro until that export was finished. If that was a longer piece, an hour-long show, a 2-hour movie, I would be completely locked out of the program until that export was finished. So you can offload those exports to Media Encoder and let it just work its way through its queue while you keep working in Premiere Pro. And your system will have to do some adjusting to balance the two programs. If you have a slower machine or an older computer, you may not want to do that process because it will take system resources to work in both programs simultaneously. If you have a fairly modern system with lots of RAM, you should be fine. So the way we export to Media Encoder is here. We go to File, Export, Send to Media Encoder. There we go. That's sent over, and I will switch to Media Encoder. Now, if you don't have Media Encoder open, it would have launched it, and you'd wait for it to open, and then you'll see the sequence has been put into the queue here. Now, it doesn't have a preset attached. It remembers the last thing you exported, so it's still set on QuickTime, but we still need to set a preset here, which is Apple ProRes 422. Now, there are options here. When you see the blue text, if you click on it, you're actually going to open up this export settings window like this. It does not match the one in Premiere Pro. It's configured a little differently, but all the same things are here. We have the format, the preset option here, export video, audio as checkboxes are here, and then there's an effects window, audio, captions, publish, and you can still choose your output publishing locations like Facebook and Vimeo and X, for example. So that's all in there. It's just a differently configured panel. This is actually what the output panel used to look like in Premiere Pro. Now, if you don't want to click on the blue text there to open up that window, both these options will open up the same panel here. You can just click on the down arrow instead and choose either your format or your preset. And again, this is a larger preset window with a lot more options in it based on whatever format is chosen over here. So if I went down to waveform audio, for example, it would just be wave. That's all you would see. Go back here to QuickTime, and we'll choose, again, ProRes 422. This is how you set the destination over here. The output file is going to, here's the file path right there. That's going to the same spot, so that's good. If you want to change the file path, you just click on that and navigate to a new output folder. All right. Now, you don't have to do it this way. There's another way to do it. If I'm actually going to clear this out. I'm not going to run this one. I'm going to select it here, and I can either hit the delete key on the keyboard or just hit this minus button up here, which is for remove. That takes it out of the queue. I'm going to go back here to Premiere Pro. In the export window, there's also a send to media encoder button here at the bottom. This will honor whatever you've set up over here. So again, I'm going to go to preset, and I'm just going to choose a different one. I'm going to go high quality 2160p 4K. So that's going to be an upres. We're exporting larger than what we had here. And I'm going to send that to media encoder. Switch over, and there it is there. And you can see that that is the preset that was assigned. That's an H.264 format, and it's ready to go here in the export folder that we set. So it does honor those settings. So if you would prefer to set up your output settings in this panel here in Premiere Pro using the export tab at the top, you can then send those settings directly to Media Encoder and add it to the queue. So let me give you a quick tour of the Media Encoder interface. So over here on the right, we have a big window for the queue. That is where all of your outputs are going to stack up. And we also have the option to set up watch folder. A watch folder is a folder you can create on the desktop, for example, and then that watch folder will have a preset assigned to it. So on your desktop, you can just drag and drop media clips into that watch folder, and Media Encoder will automatically launch and transcode those files for you based on the preset that you've attached to the watch folder. Go back here, and it's going to take that away for now. Go back to the queue. Over here on the left, we have the media browser. This is the same media browser we had in Premiere Pro. You can select your hard drives over here on the left and look inside those folders, and you can use that to find other clips that you want to bring into Media Encoder. So I will dig into the media folder that we have here for our Premiere Pro projects, and I'm going to click on Other, and I'm going to take this color clip here and just drag it over into the queue like so. I can also drag and drop from the desktop right into the queue as well. So I'll open up that Adobe Training folder again, go into Media, and I'll go to Archival and drag this newscast in just like that. All right, so any way you want to do it works. If you see this kind of generic white icon here with the film strip and the speaker, that's just a file that you've dragged in from Media Browser or your desktop. This little PR tells me that this is a sequence that's being dynamically linked from Premiere into Media Encoder for output. Down here in the lower left, we have a preset browser. It's the same as going to different combinations of these two settings here, choosing a format and then choosing a preset within the format. Otherwise, this preset browser is similar to the one we saw in Premiere Pro, where you just type in what you're looking for. So there's DNX HD, for example. Or you can just choose to scroll through them, and they're broken up into categories there. We see GoPro, MPEG-2, categories for camera, such as older formats like DV and HDV, devices, DVD, and Blu-ray, for example. So they're broken up more by category in here. There's some VR settings. and so on. So just different ways to get to your presets. Those are the system presets. If you make your own presets, they'll be here in this top folder. I have a few of my own, and you can create a preset here like so. Just click on this little plus button here, and you can create an encoding preset, and you'll get this kind of stripped down version of the output window where you can set up your video and audio the way you want it, and that's going to be baked into the preset. Name it, and it will save down here to the user presets and group folder. And then over here in the bottom right, we just have an encoding window. That's not going to be active until you actually start the queue and these encoding processes get started, and you will see progress bars here, and it will tell you how long it has left to go. Now the renderer should by default be set to your GPU for GPU acceleration. I have a Mac, and Macs now all use Metal as their accelerator, so that will be turned on. If you have a PC, you might see CUDA as the renderer here. That has to do with your NVIDIA graphics card. If you have an AMD graphics card, you'll see a different option there, probably OpenCL. Now, you can also choose to go to software only. That's more of a troubleshooting step. If you're having trouble getting outputs, or there's some weird random glitch in your output for some reason, could be your GPU overheating, or you're having a driver issue, you can flip this to software only. It will bypass your GPU completely, will not use it. Your output will take more time because it's not leveraging all the power of your computer, but you'll get most likely a cleaner output. It's just going to take a little bit longer. If you don't need to do that, just leave this with your GPU acceleration on. There's a little switch here for the option. If you have a lot of things stacked up and you're going to let it run overnight and you don't want to leave your computer on after that, you can turn on auto computer shutdown to shut your computer off once the queue has finished. Now on each of these files here, each of them has one output assigned to it. So these two have H.264s. You can add additional outputs to them like so. So there's a button here. You click on the sequence. This is the sequence from Premiere Pro. And this button right here says Add Output. That is a second output file. I'm going to turn this one into a QuickTime, and the preset, I'll go back to that 422. I'll do an HQ this time, HQ PQ. And again, that's going to the same folder. It's going to keep appending these numbers to the end of the clip. So if you want to change that and give it something a little more descriptive, it's doing that on purpose so that you don't overwrite things that were previously saved to that folder. They're not all going to be just the same file name here. So I'm going to name these with the codec just so I know what's what. ProRes HQ PQ, for example. There we go. So that one now has a unique file name. That blow up there, I'm just going to label that by the size. So I'm going to call that one a 2160 H.264. And so on and so forth. So you can rename all those, and you can remove anything you don't want. So now, you know what? I don't want to do this newscast clip. I'm just going to again hit that remove button right there. Now the queue is ready to go. You just one final step here. Where's the start button? It's up here in the upper right-hand corner. It's this green triangle here, and it says Start Queue. So I'm going to click Go. You can pause the queue or stop it completely with the two switches that showed up there. Reading XMP, it is actually pulling in that Premiere Pro sequence. It has to read it first, and once it's read into its memory, it's going to start exporting. And I will see that down here, and those are both of the outputs that were assigned to that Premiere Pro sequence. There it goes. It's doing both of them at the same time. That one's done, and now it's moving on to that color clip, and that's done. And again, this could have been full of several clips. When you make proxies in Premiere Pro, it uses Media Encoder. That all of your raw footage will be imported into Media Encoder, and the proxies will be generated right here from this window. And while all of that is happening, you can go back into Premiere Pro and you can keep working. Now let me show you some additional options for exporting. If you want to batch export several sequences, I've just created a bunch of duplicates here with different settings. So I'm just going to select all of these sequences here in the exporting project. I can go under File, Export, Media, and it will batch export all 5 of those. It's showing down here the source is 5 different sources. You set one option for all 5 up here in the presets. I'm just going to choose adaptive high bitrate. These settings will apply to all of the batched sequences here. And over here on the right, the preview is disabled because you have multiple sources, so this would be a mess. So it just doesn't show you any preview because you have all those items set up in the batch. And right there, the only option there is to actually send to Media Encoder. So there we go. And it's going to chew on those for a second and then drop them here into Media Encoder. And there they are, they're ready to go. Now here's where you can alter each one individually if you wanted those different settings for each of those sequences, or add additional outputs to each sequence in case you want multiple outputs from the same source there. And you can keep working again in Premiere Pro. There's also a shortcut to get directly to Media Encoder and bypass that export window. Just go to File, Export, Send to Media Encoder, and they would all go directly to the queue, and then you would change the settings in Media Encoder. Okay, let's switch over to this sequence here. This is a copy of the ad, but I've gone ahead and added captions. There's a captions track here at the top. Those are standard 608 captions. And again, to make captions, I'll go back to this version of the cut. You want to have the text panel available up here, and you can create captions as long as there is a transcript generated from those clips. So actually there is one, so it's ready to go, and you would just go here to captions and create captions from transcript, and it'll ask you what type. So I chose 608 right here, and that's how I got those captions there. Now you can export the captions by themselves. So I'm going to select that sequence over here in the bin. That's the one that has the captions. I named it subs. And over here on export, you can just choose export those captions by themselves. That's where you can change the file format. We have the option to do a scenarist, which is a .scc, Mac captions, which is MCC, W3C, which is an XML, or the standard subrip subtitle format, which is a .srt. All right, so all those options are available, and that's just going to output a little closed captions sidecar file. Now, if you want to export this sequence with the captions in the file, you go to here to export, and I'm going to choose a ProRes preset for that. And here in the captions panel, I'm going to turn that on. And I have two options there, or actually three. I can burn the captions into the video, meaning they're always going to be on screen and they're going to be styled however the default style was there. I did not style these captions at all because typically you don't style captions. Captions are turned on or off by the viewer, and the styling is usually determined by whatever that device is that they're watching it on, whether it's YouTube or the television or your DVD player. The captions are styled by that device. So I can also choose to create a sidecar file and then choose that file format there. Again, we see the same options, SCC, MCC, XML, or SRT. So that's going to be the video file and then a separate subtitle file. But if your format, in this case, the QuickTime format that we set up with the ProRes 422 can support it, you can embed in the output file. So in this case, this QuickTime file will have the captions available as a stream basically within that file, and then the person viewing them, and they could be doing it in QuickTime Player even on a computer, or VLC or whatever software you want to use to view this file, you can turn those captions on or off. The file format has to be correct in order to support that, and typically we see that with the 608 captions are the ones that you can embed. And I'll go ahead and export that with embedded captions. Okay, great. Now I want to talk to you about a process for speeding up your outputs. This is called smart rendering, and this is a technique you can use to render previews and then use those previews as part of the final output. So here is a sequence where I've added an adjustment layer. Again, this is the same ad, but I've added an adjustment layer and thrown on some effects until I get a red render bar here at the top, meaning it's going to have some difficulty playing that back in real time. And you can see I've added some color effects and there's a blur just so I can get a red render bar here at the top. Now you can always render previews. So sequence, render effects in to out, or just render in to out will render everything on the timeline to the preview codec, which is displayed here. Here's the sequence. It will be ProRes 422 LT. It's going to generate a ProRes LT file for displaying the entire timeline, and as long as I don't touch it or cut anything, it's not going to go away. and I can use that for smoother playback. Now, when you export from Premiere Pro, it's doing that type of render anyway on output. That's essentially what it's doing. It's taking all the information on the timeline and rendering it out to the output codec that you have chosen. Now, if you render the timeline and then go to output, it's basically doing the same thing twice. Let's save some time. Why not use the renders we've already generated as part of the output process and save ourselves that step? So I'm going to go ahead and render this entire timeline, but I'm going to change the preview codec here to my output codec, which is ProRes 422. All right, so I've just rendered previews for this entire sequence. You can see now the bar is green. I get real-time playback. I'm not dropping any frames. And I'm going to utilize those rendered previews in my output. So I'm going to go here to export again. And there it is. It's set up. It's ready to go. I'm going to change this format and preset to match the codec that I chose as the preview codec in the sequence settings. And there's actually a shortcut, so I don't have to guess or go back and look at it again. I can actually go right here to the preset menu and go down all the way to the bottom. Match sequence preview settings. So whatever those preview settings were, it's going to match it. In this case, it was going to be a QuickTime ProRes 422. I did choose 422 as the preview codec for that sequence. And down here under General, this Use Preview switch is on. If you chose that Match Sequence Preview Settings preset, by default, this turns that on. Applicable only for sequence exports from Premiere Pro. If preview files are already generated in Premiere Pro, selecting this option will use those preview files and make rendering faster. So what it's going to do, because we already have a green bar in our timeline there, it's going to use those generated ProRes files. By rendering previews, you've actually written ProRes files to your computer. It's going to go back and use those exact same rendered ProRes files for this output. It's not going to do it twice. It's already been done. So we're going to get, it's like we've already kind of pre-baked the cake and it's just ready to come out of the oven. So we're going to go ahead and hit export with this Use Preview switch on. Done. So much faster than if we had tried to do it with that off. And I'm actually going to simulate that now. So I'll get rid of those render files. Yes, I do wish to delete. Now I'll go back. I'm going to export. And again, I will match the sequence preview settings. We're just going to make another 422. I'll turn that box off because we don't need it now. And I'm going to hit export. And see, it's obviously going to take a much longer time. It hasn't even started yet. So a good time-saving tip, if you're under the crunch for a deadline and you know that your output might take a long time at the end of the day because of all the effects and the adjustment layers or whatever you've added to your sequence, and you know you're going to output to a format that this is good for, like a QuickTime ProRes or an MXF, the format has to support it. You can't really do this with H.264. Compressed output formats don't really work with this, but ProRes, DNN, HD, for example, those will work. You're going to want to render your entire timeline or chunks of your timeline. You can do in and out points. Render the sections that are completed. If you're still cutting parts of it, don't render those. But you want to get to that solid green bar all the way across. Use that Use Previews checkbox on output. And again, the codec has to match. So whatever you set as the preview codec for the sequence has to be the same output codec that you're going for. It will use those previews. It won't go back in and try to re-render your entire sequence. It's going to actually use the rendered previews that are already available on the disk. It's going to read them, and your export will be really, really fast. Now, if you work a lot with graphics, especially dynamically linked After Effects comps you've brought into Premiere Pro, I'll show you a quick tip for speeding up those renders on the timeline. So I've got a variation of the ad here, and there is an After Effects comp that I've imported with this 3D animation, and you see I've got the red bar there. Now, if I were to render previews for this entire timeline, so it's green, and use those previews in the output, no problem. But while I'm working, sometimes it's nice to have not to have to render things constantly, especially these dynamically linked comps, which can get pretty involved and increase the processing time of my computer every time the playhead hits them. And if I don't render my timeline and choose to export without any rendered previews, every time the software hits those AE comps that are brought in from After Effects, it's going to slow down the export process. So select the graphic, go to the clip menu, and select Render and Replace. So you've got some options here. What this is going to do is actually generate a little QuickTime file of this graphic right on the timeline, and that's what Premiere Pro is going to play back. So I'm going to leave this at Sequence for the source. I'm going to change the format to QuickTime, and I'll pick a preset here. I've got some options to match source, and that's Apple ProRes 422. That happens to match the sequence codec preview setting that I set, and match source is just going to make sure it matches the frame size and the frame rate. And where does that go? You can just choose where that file will be generated. I've got a scratch disk already set up, so I'll just put it in there. And you can even include handles. If you have cut into this graphic or the clip that you're rendering and replacing, and it's actually longer on disk than you have in the timeline, you can render some handles in there as well. And I'm just going to leave that off. I believe this is the full length of the graphic anyway. And if you've added any effects to the clip, like color filter or anything else, you can choose to include those. They'll be baked into this QuickTime. I'll hit OK. And the transcode happens right here in this pop-up window. No need to go actually into the export window at all. And there we go. Now, visually, it looks the same on the timeline, but you'll notice right away that red bar went away completely, and it's actually, there is no color there at all, which is great. We're not even getting yellow. And that's nice, smooth playback with no dropped frames, and you'll see it actually generated a piece of media over here in the bins. If I double click on it, that is that ProRes 422 QuickTime file that was just rendered right there from the timeline. So as long as you don't have to make any changes to the original graphic, you can leave that where it is and keep working, and your playback and editing will be so much smoother. And when it comes time to export, Premiere will also just use that file instead of going back and trying to render out from the original After Effects file, which takes extra time. By the way, if you want to undo that, the nice thing about this is you can actually undo it, especially if you updated that After Effects graphic after the fact. You just right click on it, and under the top here, you see Restore Unrendered. That's going to return it to the original state. It is now the live After Effects comp that was in the timeline. You'll notice that that QuickTime file went away here from the bins. So Premiere Pro is intelligently switching these on and off and removing that media from your project, because it's assuming, okay, you're going to restore unrendered, you're going to go back into After Effects now, some changes have been made to this graphic, it's going to update it, and you're going to want to render and replace again so that this graphic matches its current state. All right, now let's talk about which export settings to use. Now, I know that this preset browser can be pretty intimidating. There's a lot of options to choose from in here. So let me just show you a few of the basic ones that you might run across. Now, if you are exporting an ad for broadcast, you're going to have a spec sheet from the vendor that tells you exactly what those settings are. And you just want to go through, select the right format, so QuickTime or MPEG-4, for example, and go through and set up all of your settings correctly to match those specs. When you've got your file set up the way you want it, you click on these three dots here, and you can go to Save Preset, give your preset a name, and it will then show up in your preset browser as one of your custom presets. You don't have to go through and set it up each time. And assuming you are going out to broadcast, for example, or you just want a high quality kind of master file of this project, which I always recommend, don't just save the compressed version at the end of a project. Make a nice high quality file that you can go back to later without having to reopen the Premiere Pro project. We're going to select here from presets. I'm just going to choose a ProRes. I'm going to go HQ for a nice master file, for example, format, QuickTime. And under video for that, by the way, you're going to want to select depth, maximum bit depth here, render at maximum depth, and change 8-bit to 16. And you're also going to want to select maximum render quality here. Now, those two little switches have been in Premiere Pro for a long time, and in the past, on a slower computer or an older computer, it may have increased the export time without giving you the benefit of any extra quality. Nowadays, it's not really that relevant. The computers are very fast, and you want to make sure both those switches are on when you're doing a high quality master export like this or for broadcast, just in case it runs across any effect or graphic or anything that might require a little bit of extra rendering, you want to make sure that those two switches are on. You want to make sure you have the absolute maximum quality when you output. It's not going to add much more time to your output time. So again, keep render at maximum depth on and maximum render quality on, just in case the software needs those options, and make sure your depth is at 16. Even if you have 8-bit graphics, you're going to want it at 16 just to avoid any accidental banding or anything like that that might happen on the output. This is going to ensure you have the maximum quality, and you should be good to go. And again, you can save all those settings in a custom preset up here, so you don't have to worry about setting it all up again. Now, if you're exporting for the web, you're putting something on YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, there are custom presets in there for that. So we're going to go down to more presets. There are presets for various services. So I'll type in YouTube, and you can see there's some YouTube settings there based on the frame size. So here's a 1080, here's a 4K, and then there's some old standard definition formats and a 720 HD option. You can just turn on the star, and those will appear in your preset list. So here's that YouTube preset there. You just want to double check that the frame size is correct and the frame rate matches. Now down here, when you're exporting H.264 files, you have options to change how it is encoded. So you've got hardware or software encoding here. Hardware encoding uses more of your system for the export. It's gonna make that export time really snappy, but you have to have the right hardware for that to kick in. And you can change the profile there if you want something different besides the high profile there, the levels. And down here below, you actually have a bitrate slider for those. And by default, these typically go to variable bitrate. You can also do a constant bitrate. And the choice there, if you're not familiar, variable bitrate will take into account the types of motion that you have in your project. If you have a lot of static shots, you don't need particularly high bitrate to try to cover that motion. And variable bitrate will actually do a lower bit rate for those sections. And then when motion kicks in and things are moving much more quickly, it may change to a higher bit rate there. So the bit rate's constantly changing depending on the content, which is nice because the overall file size at the end will be a lot smaller. If you want to do constant bit rate, so the bit rate is exactly the same all the way throughout, just change that to CBR, which is constant bit rate here. And you can change the target bit rate there. That's pretty good for YouTube, about 16 to 18. Don't crank it all the way to the top. You're going to have a massive file with no extra quality benefits there, but don't make it too small because it's really going to look pretty blocky and crusty. So you want to play around with these settings. So if you're doing your own custom settings there, I recommend just exporting a few tests, and you can even use the in and out points just to do a portion of your timeline. If you have a long timeline, just do some quick tests of a small portion of it. Try constant bit rate, variable bit rate, different bit rates in there, and see which one comes out the best. Now, if you're just trying to kick out a quick file for someone to preview, there are a couple of preset options to be aware of in here. And these are really good for that quick export menu where you're just trying to get a file off your system really, really fast. Those presets are in here. You're going to see match source, adaptive high, low, and medium bit rate. And you're also going to see high quality with the 1080p and 2160 4K options here. So what's the difference there? I'm going to select that high quality 1080 HD. And that again is just going to create an H.264 file. It's going to be an MPEG-4 wrapper. It's set to VBR, variable bitrate 1 pass, with a target bitrate of 20 megabits per second. That's going to give me about an 86 megabyte file. Now this high quality option is going to give you the exact same bitrate unless you change it here in the settings. It's going to give you the exact same bitrate no matter how big or how small your frame size is. So if you use this at 1080 or 2K, 4K or above, it's always going to be at 20 megabits per second, for example, unless you change this slider here. But these newer options, when I say newer, they've actually been in the software for quite a while, are match source, adaptive high, low, and medium bitrate. Let's change that to high bitrate. Now that's going to be at 15. Now, the key word here is adaptive. When you see the word adaptive, it's going to look at the frame size and the frame rate of your sequence and try to find the most efficient bit rate for you. And you can see down here, the estimated file size is 66 instead of 86 like we had with that other high quality preset. So adaptive is really going to take all the factors into consideration. It's not going to do a one size fits all bit rate for your sequence. It's going to adapt to the size and the frame rate of your sequence. And these are just presets that give you particular bit rates here. So it's going to try to target 15 at the high level. And we'll change that to the medium. It'll be 9 at the medium level. And it'll be 4.6 at the low. Now, as I'm changing these, I'm actually getting an updated preview over here in the preview window here. And low bit rate actually still looks pretty good. It's getting a little bit jagged in some of the finer details, but in general, the low bit rate looks pretty good. And if you're just trying to get a quick export out of your system, in front of your client, in front of your producer, just so they can see your work, I recommend the low bit rate. I think it looks pretty good, and it's very, very light and fast, and it's easy to upload. You can see there the file size for this 30-second spot is going to be around 20 megabytes. You could almost email that to someone. Otherwise, it's a very fast Dropbox or Frame.io upload, for example, and super fast, super easy to put up on the web for review. Okay, so that is exporting from Premiere Pro. Hopefully now you feel more confident in selecting the best output option for your project. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one.